transferred to the General Assembly, taken out of the hands of the Security Council and placed into the hands of the General Assembly, but there is a difference here. The General Assembly, when it passes a resolution under this Uniting for Peace resolution, has to do so with a 2/3 majority, and its resolution is non-binding. Whereas a resolution passed by the Security Council itself is binding, is legally binding on all members of the United Nations. The Uniting for Peace resolution is never used. It exists in principle, it is never resorted to. The third big component of the United Nations system, as it is headquartered in New York City, is the Secretariat. The Secretariat, which is housed in that big, tall, kind of pillbox-shaped rectangular building that you see on pictures. The Secretariat is the implementing body of the United Nations. When the General Assembly or the Security Council passes a resolution, somebody has to put that resolution into practice. Somebody has to implement it. Somebody has to oversee its implementation. This is the work of the Secretariat of the United Nations, which is staffed by people from all the member states. They are international civil servants. They are hired in approximate proportion, this isn't an iron law, but they are hired in an approximate proportion to the contribution, the financial contribution that their country makes to the United Nations budget. So as the American contribution has dropped from about 25% to closer to 22%, or just under 22%, the number of Americans working in the United Nations Secretariat is adjusted accordingly, and so forth. Members of the Secretariat are usually very highly trained foreign service officers and diplomats from their own countries. They are essentially tenured there. They are, unless they do something very wrong, they are hired for the length of their career, and they report to the person who is at the head of the Secretariat, and that is the Secretary General of the United Nations. The Secretary General of the United Nations also has a vital part in peacekeeping operations and in the work of the Security Council. He, or perhaps one day she, can call meetings of the Security Council and so forth. The current Secretary General of the United Nations is Ban Ki-moon, who is South Korean. Before that, it was Kofi Annan, who served 2 terms, who is a Ghanaian diplomat, and before that, you've had diplomats from a variety of countries, from Egypt, right before that, Austria, Peru, Burma, and so forth. So that is the basic structure of the United Nations. There is one other important body of the United Nations which it has inherited from its predecessor organization. What was its predecessor organization?
League of Nations.
The League of Nations. And that body is the International Court of Justice, sometimes referred to as the World Court. The International Court of Justice is headquartered in The Hague, which is the capital of the Netherlands. Its judges are distinguished jurists, or a panel of distinguished jurists from member states, and it basically deals with issues of international law. When one state questions the legality of the conduct of another state, it can take that state essentially to court, to the International Court of Justice. The judges of the International Court then issue a ruling The one thing that makes the International Court of Justice somewhat less effective than it otherwise would have been is that both parties in this case to the dispute or litigation have to agree to have the issue decided by the ICJ, by the International Court of Justice. Very, very different from domestic courts. If I sue you, for example, you don't have to agree to be sued in court. All that's necessary is that I file a suit. And if you're very guilty and if you're smart, you'll never agree to be sued. So that